Hello and welcome. My name is Monica Emery. I'm Executive Director of the Center for World Music. Thank you so much for joining us today, and a special thanks to those of you who made a donation in support of the Center for World Music and the musician you'll be hearing today. The COVID pandemic has severely impacted the ability of musicians, dancers, and theater artists to earn an income. If you didn't make a donation and you'd like to after this program, we will provide you a link so you can show your support. This is our first ever virtual series of music, performance, and discussion. We know that we can't recreate the energy that's unique to live performance, but we know that you will find what we present today new and valuable. As with all of our programming, our goal for Virtual Encounters for World Music and Dance is to foster intercultural awareness and understanding through in-depth encounters with the world's performing arts traditions. We hope you will join us for the remaining 2 concerts in 2021. We will be streaming live from Poland on Saturday, March 20th, Roots of Revival with Janusz Prusnelski Kumpania. And on June 6th, we'll be presenting the traditional music and dance of Maguindanao, Philippines, featuring Samahan. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Rice Inhaling Development Group, the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture, and the California Humanities, a nonprofit partner for the National Endowment for the Humanities. Now, let me introduce to you the president of the Center for World Music and UCLA Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Ethnomusicology, Tim Rice.
Thank you, Monica, and welcome everyone to our virtual encounter with the classical music of Iran. Our artist today is Kourosh Taghavi. Kourosh was born in Iran, where he studied with some of Iran's leading musicians. Today he lives in San Diego, where he's a very active and highly valued teacher of Persian music in the schools. As a performer and composer, he's toured widely in the United States, Europe, and Asia, and he's toured with some of Iran's leading musicians as well as wonderful musicians from many other traditions. And I'm particularly delighted that we can present him today. He's joined in conversation with Solmaz Shakerifard. Solmaz is a PhD candidate in Near and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Washington. Her doctoral dissertation is going to be about the teaching and performing practices of musicians from Iran. And she's also a co-founder of the Seattle-based Ensemble Beati, which specializes in music of the Indian Ocean. So I'm delighted now to welcome Kourosh and Solmaz.
Thank you, Professor Rice, and welcome everyone to the 4th event of the Center for World Music's online series, Encounter with World Music. I'm Solmaz Shakerifard, and I'm honored today to be here virtually with our guest, Kourosh Taghavi. Before I introduce Kourosh and we dive into his beautiful music, I wanted to mention that we have a great audience who are joining us on our YouTube live streaming here from all over the world. So I wanted to ask everybody, if you can, go on and write in the comments, where are you joining us from? Here I can see that we have people joining us from El Paso, Texas, from Chicago, from Canberra, Australia. This is very, very exciting. So let me get back to our guest, Kourosh. Kourosh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and um, a little bit about where you learned the music and your instrument?
Um, Hello, everyone. Allow me to thank Monica and Dr. Rice for everything they have been doing for Center for World Music and many different programs that Center is responsible for. And personally, I owe a lot of the great things that I have experienced as a musician in San Diego for the past 15 years. I definitely owe it to Center for World Music, and I think I'm not the only artist teacher who says that about the center. So thank you very much. I was born in a little city called Gorgan in northern part of Iran, very close to the Caspian Sea. I moved to the US in 1984. As many of your audience members would probably remember, that was during the Iran-Iraq War. So my parents wanted to save my life and send me to the US to become a doctor, which they miserably failed at the second one. They certainly saved my life, but after studying in college for a few years, I encountered my later on teachers in a concert, and I fell in love with music and specifically setar, and decided to become a musician and not a physician. So that's where I started playing the sitar, and that was about 30 some years ago. And I think I've said this many times that my only regret in life is that I started playing sitar at the age of 24 and not at the age of 14. So that's pretty much a fast walk down the memory lane for me.
Thank you, Kourosh. So let's get into the music. What is the first song that we're going to hear? Can you tell us a little bit about this song, please?
Since the context of our conversation is going to be Persian classical music in its history and modern times, I thought it would be great to start with an older composition by Ustad Darvish Khan, and which its poem is by Malik al-Shu'ara Bahar. This song was composed during the 1906 constitutional revolution of Iran. So it has that texture and that feeling and emotion about it. We performed this last year to commemorate Ustad Muhammad Reza Shajarian's passing. And we thought it's one of the famous songs that he over and over for throughout years had performed. So we dedicated that performance to Ustad Shajarian. My friend Nasser Shekhzadgan is on oud, and my friend Hesama Abedini is the vocalist in that piece, which is in Dastgah Mahur.
Thank you.
Sure.
And let's listen.
به شب وصل جانا دیوانه شدم، به شمع روی جانا پروانه شدم، جانا پروانه شدم. شب وصلت جانا دیوانه شدم، به شمع رویت جانا پروانه شدم، جانا پروانه شدم. به مه روی تو من جانا حیران و ماتم، ز غم عشق تو شد جانا صبر و ثباتم. به حال من نگر دلبر دلبر، زار و نزارم جانا، زار و نزارم جانا، زار و نزارم. شیدای تو ام تاج سرم، بیا به سرم. رسوای تو ام چشم ترم، بنشین ببرم. عاشقم کردی جانا، دلم را بردی. به زلف سرکجت دلبر دلبر، گم شده دلم جانا، گم شده دلم. به ماه عارضت دلبر دلبر، حل کن مشکلم جانا، حل کن مشکلم جانا، حل کن مشکلم. به شب وصلت جانا دیوانه شدم، به شمع رویت جانا پروانه شدم، جانا پروانه شدم، جانا پروانه شدم.
What a beautiful tribute to a great Ustad of Iranian classical vocal music. Thank you, Kourosh. I just wanted to remind all of our viewers that while we're having this conversation, if you have any questions from Kourosh, you can post those in the YouTube chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Thank you. So, Kourosh, we were talking about the history and the significance of this tasnif earlier. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about, in general, about Iranian classical music, its history, and in which context does it originate? Who has historically made this music? Just a little bit of context and history about the music. Thank you.
Sure. Allow me to say that if I'm answering any of your questions while we're watching this, it's not me. I'm not using my extraterrestrial powers to do that. My dear wife Sarah is doing that for me on my phone. So don't be surprised if you get an answer from me. So that's what it is. To answer your question, obviously this is a pretty. It can become a very long, deep discussion about the context in which Persian classical music has evolved in, but I try to make it as short as possible. I think there are many different contexts that this music this art form was developed in, just like any other art form. Um, First of all, the music that we call Persian classical music today, its roots can be detected back to the beginning of Qajar dynasty for sure. Has it only been that far back that this started? More than likely not. But this is what we know. So first of all, for your viewers, the context is about 150 years ago, almost 200 years ago. That like historically, that's what we're talking about. At the same time, and there are other, I think, contexts that coexist with the historical part of it. First of all, Persians are very keen on their poetry, and Persian poetry is the way of Persians, of Iranian and Persian philosophers to relay their thoughts and ideas. So the context is also the muse that exists for the Persian poetry, which is mysticism. So part of that music is connected to the mysticism that, just like an ongoing river has been part of Persian culture for centuries. So that's another context. We touched on the constitutional revolution in 1906. So political and sociological ideas, modernism, if you will, of that era has a lot to do with it. There are master musicians who have written extensively about this, that it seems like during the Qajar dynasty, a lot of Westerners were traveling to Iran, and some of them were musicians, and the Iranian musician heard about this concept of having a repertoire to teach with and study. So they gathered all of these melodies under these context of 7 dasgahs, which are the Persian modes, and 5 smaller dasgahs, which we call avaz. So that idea of having a repertoire perhaps came through that interaction with the Western musicians and Western historians. So all of these together, I think, is the context in which Persian classical music should be looked upon. Not just one of them, in my opinion. And of course, the main idea behind teaching this tradition is through oral tradition. So traditionally, you work with a master musician, you learn these melodies, which we call the radif, which is consisted of 7 major modes. And by major, I don't mean the definition of major as a scale, larger, more complex systems, and 5 smaller systems which we call avaz. So you learn all of these melodies that have been handed down, from master to student and so on and so forth. And we learn those melodies and, of course, compositions from the same era, which we call classical compositions at this point. And you learn that, and you try to develop your own sense of aesthetics and understanding, and you move this music and art form forward. So here I like to make this point that a lot of ethnomusicologists in the past, not anymore at least, used to call Persian classical music a traditional music. By giving something a traditional value, it means that cannot change. It needs to stay the way it has been. And it's not the case with Persian classical music. That's why I don't use the term traditional. I think it's a becoming art form. Its context keeps getting added to it. There are new contexts that are added to the music. I've always looked at it as a grammar that we have to tell our own stories. Using the same grammar, I can write a 10-volume novel. I can write a short poem. I can write a poem in a form of a ghazal, which is a classic form, so on and so forth. Just like any other art form, that you use it as your raw material to create. So as long as you look at it from this perspective, it's definitely not a tradition. It's a classical form. It has its roots in the past, and it's definitely looking forward to the future.
What an interesting way of explaining all of this, how this classical music from Iran is an intertwining of things from the past looking forward and all these modes that you were talking about. So you were talking about these 7 most complex modes, the dastgahs. So each song is in one dastgah or in one mode, right?
Yes. The reason I hesitate to say yes is that each of these dastgahs are composed of different modes within themselves. So a performance of Persian classical music is also a modulation between modes, even in one song, not in just a whole performance. So yes, but keeping that in mind. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's listen to the second song of today. The name of the song is Bidad. We're going to listen and then we will come back and talk about the importance of this song and the name.
Sure.
Let's listen. That was a beautiful piece, Kourosh. Thank you. So I have a question that is related to this piece. Was this piece pre-composed or were you improvising? I could hear some improvisational characteristics there somewhere. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the rhythmic part of the piece, the last piece that you heard, the latter part of it, was composed, and the beginning part was an improvisation. So that is somewhat one of the forms of Persian classical music that, if you have composed a piece, there is a non-metric prelude to it, if you will, which is usually improvised. Whether that metric piece is improvised or composed still doesn't make any difference. There's always a prelude to that, which is a free verse, if you will, and that's normally improvised. Yes, the beginning of the piece was improvised, and the piece was composed, I want to say, in 2000, before pandemic for sure. I had a solo tour that I had composed a few pieces for. This is one of those pieces that I performed in that tour.
And what Bidad is the name of a melody of a gushe, right?
Yes.
And what dastgah is it in?
Bidad is a gushe in Dastgah Humayun.
Okay.
But allow me to say a few anecdotes about this gushe.
Yeah.
We talked about like the muse of Persian music. One of its muses is Persian poetry, and Persian poetry deals with a lot of metaphors, and it deals in, if you will, unknowns most of the time. So very very smartly, if you will, this gushe is called Bidad. Bidad means injustice. So one of the themes of Persian poetry throughout centuries, from 1,000 years ago that we looked upon Shahnameh to later on, and even contemporary poetry, is this fight against injustice, this paying attention to the injustice that goes on. And very cleverly, this name has been picked by people who named it, and all of us, the contemporary musicians who have witnessed a lot of these injustices in our times, in our lifetimes. We, if you will, metaphorically, we use that to just relay the same message again, that we are aware of the injustices, and this is my of saying that I'm aware of it and I will do something about it. So again, we were talking about Persian classical music is becoming all the time. This is another example of it. Not my piece, but this way of looking at things. And of course, I named that Char Mizrab Bidad firstly because it was in Gushe Bidad, but it was during the time that I thought I was witnessing a lot of injustices here in my new country and, of course, all over the world.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's very meaningful. And I guess that's why to an Iranian ear, that mode, that melody sounds so familiar, because throughout the years, throughout history, we have heard this time and time again.
Absolutely.
So we have a question from the audience, two questions indeed. One question is, let me see. RMS Music Boosters is asking whether the instrument that you played was setar or the Indian setar. And I'm asking this because I get this question a lot. What is the difference between setar, Iranian setar, and the Indian setar? So if you may.
Yes. No, this is setar, S-E-T-A-R, and the Indian setar is S-I-T-A-R. Incidentally, the Persian setar is the ancestor of Indian setar. A very famous poet, musician named Amir Khosrow Dehlavi fled Iran and went to India. This is centuries ago. and took the setar with him to northern India. And of course, the ingenuity of Indian musicians and Indian instrument makers, they combined that with the southern Indian string instrument called veena. And this combination has brought about the grand Indian sitar that we all have fallen in love with after Ravi Shankar and Nikhil Banerjee played it and we heard them. So it's incidentally, if I may, I performed for Ravi Shankar's 90th birthday here in San Diego at the Museum of Art. I met him and it was such a wonderful time to meet a legend. It's Ravi Shankar, as little as he was as big as this world. So kind, so welcoming. And then he talked to me about, that instrument you play is the grandfather of my instrument, right? So we talked about, how he was in Iran during the Shiraz Art Festival and that performance of his. I just wanted to, remember Ravi Shankar because he's been such an influence on music throughout the world. It's not even funny. So I just wanted to attribute my love and devotion to his beauty and in music.
Very interesting. So two different but related instruments, yes, and very much compatible. And they are played on the stage a lot.
Yes.
You can say that, yes. We have another question from Gwen Elizabeth Bullock. She's asking, can you link us to a piece that was played in different ways by different generations of musicians?
I will put it in the chat later on. Yes, there are many pieces from the Qajar era that, different musicians have performed them. Those are part of the classical pieces that we all learn and play throughout, our careers. And many musicians, have used Western technique of using polyphony to replay a classical song. Some have performed it in a unison form with a larger ensemble, have arranged them for, large Western orchestras, so on and so forth. Yes, there are many examples of it. I will put some in the chat and they can...
Great, thank you. So let's go and listen to more music. The next song is from the album Ode to Hope, and the song is called The Greenest of the Green. We're going to listen to the song, and then we're going to come back and talk with Kourosh about the importance of this song to you and all of us Iranians. Let's listen. What a beautiful song. Thank
Thank
you. Kourosh, can you tell us who was playing what instrument in this piece?
My dear friend Pejman Haddadi was on percussion. He was playing tombak, and the percussive frame drums that he had in front of him, they're incidentally his design, and he uses them a lot to create different timbres and sounds of music that we play. And of course, my other dear friend, Said Kamji on Kamanche.
Thank you. So, before you were talking about the constitutional era, about the constitutional revolution earlier in the 20th century in Iran. And I know that this song, the piece that we just heard, has a significance to you, and there's a history behind it. Can you tell us a little bit more about the social political context of Iranian classical music?
We call this album that it's due to come out anytime soon after 10 years, Ode to Hope, for many different reasons. More than anything else, my wife was pregnant with our first child at the time. And we were hopeful that, that will change our lives for the better. She would be born, totally healthy and everything, which she did. And so that was part of the hope that we had in mind, or I had in mind. At the same time, what was called at the time the Green Movement was going on in Iran, and people had taken to the streets to demand their rights peacefully. And so this is a contribution on my behalf to that whole thing, that whole concept of wanting to live freely, talking about justice, equality, and so many values that we used to think they were universal values, and we were reminded over and over again throughout the past decade, all over the world, they are not actually. They are being stepped on every chance authoritarian thinkers get. So the story was that for me to compose that piece. Again, this piece, this whole album is composed in Mod Ras Panjgah, in Dastgah, which was at one point not heard by public very often. Actually, the first performance of Ras Panjgah was at the Shiraz Art Festival when Ustad Mohammad Reza Lutfi, Mohammad Reza Shajarian, and Nasser Farhangfard performed Ras Panjgah in public for the first time. So ever since, every young musician or a musician who was touched by that time, that new wave of music, if you will, in Iran, we sort of feel connected to that performance because it started something new for a lot of people. I was very young when I heard it. I was 10 years old, I think. So I had that in mind, that I want to also compose something in Ras Panjgah that had such an emotional effect on me as a person and later on as a musician. Of course, I wanted to use what my contemporaries have experienced with the sound and new forms and so on and so forth. So all of that makes that, especially that piece, very special to me. And after, like I said, I composed this in 2009. I've only performed it with Pejman and Saeed. I would never dare perform it with anybody else because it's impossible to play it with anybody else, because we all felt the same emotions at the same time. We were very close as friends as well, but that whole thing is just what you just saw, and I cannot, I think, I cannot bring myself to perform with anybody else. So that's why it took so long to record it and hopefully release it later on this year.
Yeah, that's fascinating, the way that social political context really plays an important role in the creation and the becoming of older forms into newer forms and newer sounds. Thank you for that. I remember you told me a story about this piece, actually, a story that is related to 2016, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us that story about the piece?
Are we talk about it and play the music first, or just you want?
Yeah, sure.
Let's hear the music. I think the Treeless Leaf, right?
Yes. So the next.
Let's listen to that, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So the next piece we're going to listen to is from the album Ode to Love. And it's actually two pieces, right?
Yes, they're connected. We'll talk about it on the other side of it.
Yes. So
Sure.
let's hear.
Was Sarah, not me.
Those are two very beautiful pieces. And for anyone and everyone who understands Persian, those poems are very meaningful. So Kourosh, please tell us about these two pieces and their importance.
Again, we go back to the contemporary approaches to a classical concept and classical art form. These two pieces were composed in 2016, specifically after November 3rd. And we, the poems are by Shafi'i Katkani, and the first one is a treeless leaf. It talks about a leaf that had fallen from the tree, so it loses its connection to its roots, if you will, which was sort of an identity issue or identity question for me. That, you know, as an immigrant, you know, I have left my old country and I've settled in the new country. I've my family, and so my roots are pretty deep here. I don't feel as, you know, treeless as I might have, you know, 20 years ago, but there's that sense with you as an immigrant. It always stays with you. And then the second part, second poem, talks about a storm that's taking place outside of your home, and there is a fight going on between the wind and the leaf. There's a fight going on between the sun and darkness, between the clouds and the sunshine. So it's metaphorically talks about the good and evil of our times, you know, going head to head, and that's how I felt, you know, in 2016. And incidentally, the first time we performed this song, we were performing in Berkeley, California. And by some weird chance and bad luck, I was passing a kidney stone that night, a day. So my wife took me to the emergency room, and it was the day of inauguration. Donald Trump was on the, in front of the Capitol building. He was making his American Carnage speech. And, I was passing this kidney stone in pain and looking at TV. And they called my name. I went in. So the the nurse asked me what was going on. And I said, I think I'm passing a kidney stone. That's why I'm in so much pain. And I looked up at the screen and I said, but then again, I think the whole country is passing a kidney today. So she laughed, and then, and then we had the concert that night. And emotions again were very high, especially after this song, because it's very obvious that, what's in it, what its intentions are. And that's exactly was my intention, to voice my disgust with what was going on. I had spent decades putting my feet down in my new country, and I wasn't about to let go of its beauty.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have two questions from the audience that I would like to get to. Gregory Scarborough is asking, at what stage with knowing this music, Iranian classical music, must one be to improvise? Or is it simply related to the feelings of the students? Some traditions are very strict on this. How is this viewed?
Improvisation is one of the latest or last levels of musicianship in any art form, because you have to have had enough experience, enough technique, if you will, enough knowledge of the music to be able to create something on the spot that is related to that art form, and it's not a repetition. Which requires years and years of training and listening to music and so on and so forth. And the greatest musicians in the world will tell you that not every time they have improvised, it came out okay. So it is a very fascinating concept if you really want to do it well. It does require, practicing. You need to be able to put yourself in a position, in a frame of mind that you can relate your feelings to the sound that you want to create. And my teacher, Ustad Lotfi, encouraged his students from early on to improvise for themselves, not for audience, to understand how they reach into their feelings, how they get connected to their feelings. That is also, he always said, that needs practice as well. So it is definitely on the later stages of your musical training, but it's also an ongoing practice. So it is good to improvise when you are a pretty experienced musician, so you're not just playing whatever it is that comes to your mind with no forms whatsoever. But at the same time, it requires training and mindfulness.
And one last question, because this is really interesting to me as well. Deba Amataya asks, Ustad, you mentioned that Persian classical music relates to the tradition of mysticism. Does this stem from a particular religious tradition? Thank you.
Well, Iranians by tradition have been Muslims for the past 1400 years or so. That doesn't mean other traditions have not existed in Iran, or as a matter of fact, when Islam enters Iran, according to one of the scholars, there were about 2,500, if I'm not mistaken, I might be wrong with the numbers, 2,500 Buddhist temples that existed in then Persian Empire. So there are other traditions, and these traditions all have contributed to what we call today the mysticism that exists in poetries of poets, right, like Saadi, Hafiz, Maulana, and so many other ones. So the mysticism that I talked about, it's from that historical aspect.
Thank you so much, Kourosh. I think I can speak on behalf of all of our audience that this was a wonderful afternoon. I really enjoyed hearing your music and speaking with you and being with you. And thank you so much to Center for World Music for these wonderful series. Thank you.
Thank you, and especially thank every audience member who spend their Sunday afternoon with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kourosh and Solmaz, for a wonderful afternoon of good music and good conversation. Monica, please remind our viewers how they can support this wonderful musician.
Thanks, Tim. This series was made possible through the sponsorship of individuals, businesses, and grants from the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture and the California Humanities. But their generosity isn't enough, so we're counting on viewers like you to make a donation of whatever amount to help the Center for World Music support these amazing musicians and the traditions that they represent. If you'd like to make a donation at this time, please visit centerforworldmusic.org/donate. And we hope you can join us Saturday, March 20th for Roots of Revival with Janusz Prusnowski Kumpania. For upcoming events, please visit centerforworldmusic.org/events. Please take note of our sponsors who have made this series possible. Thank you for joining us and have a great afternoon.